I'm so excited to be part of the Witness Fall and Winter 2020 issue. I'm going to be reading from my short story, We Were There. All you need to know for the part that I'm going to read is that the narrator has recently met a guy named Kane at a summer party. I liked Kane because he was so relaxed. I'm a casual kind of guy, he had said at the party. And it was true. He didn't seem to have a formal bone in his body. Even when, later, I saw him in more structured clothing, a jacket with lapels, close-toed boots, he still managed to give off an incredibly indolent impression, like he was always sprawled out on a picnic blanket under a shaded tree. The harsh things of the world probably slid off of him, like water from a shower curtain. When I met him, Kane was between jobs. The company he'd worked for the last 4 years had cut his department, and he was looking for work with no leads. But from the unhurried way he talked about it, I thought he was still taking it better than most. He spent his time drinking with friends, playing video games, walking around his neighborhood, tooling around on side projects while figuring out his next steps. I started dating someone else I met at the party, a photographer named Aaron. He was good-looking in a carefully manufactured way, the dark V-neck tees and immaculate architecture of his hair, always simple but never unplanned. He was a photographer who worked with a lot of high-end brands and products, who'd shot for brands whose expensive window displays shimmered glassily on long, skyscrapered avenues downtown. After the party, he'd reached out through the friend I'd come with and asked me to ramen. We walked around and stopped at 2 bars before he said, "Well, my place is up the street there. Do you want to see it?" After we slept together, he said that he really just wanted to keep his attention on his work. He was at an important stage where his career was taking off, and he didn't want anything serious. Curled naked in his bed, not touching him, I immediately felt a tension that had been in me relax and release. Some unspoken expectation lifted, or the fear of some such expectation. "Fine with me," I said. He looked unconvinced, and I added that I was applying to grad school and I didn't want anything getting in the way of that. Aaron's whole demeanor loosened, and he said that was great. He hated it when people had asked him for a lot, like his thoughts on marriage or long-distance phone calls at certain times every day. Same, I agreed. That's too much pressure. And I believed what I said. It was better this way. While we were together that night and even later, when he said things I disagreed with or acted in ways that I had found irritating, I would suppress this instinct and remind myself we were both placeholders for each other, and in this way, not be too disappointed. Perhaps because of this relief from expectation, Aaron was occasionally generous towards me. He liked to have me come over to his apartment late at night, often last minute, but he would also cook for me. With him, I didn't have to talk much. He was willing to fill the silence with observations or questions that weren't too demanding. I didn't find what he had to say particularly interesting, but I didn't mind it. Such ambivalence was new to me. I either loved someone or hated them, oscillating on extremes of loyalty and apathy. I was always anxious about one relationship or another, but it was tiring being such a purist. It had been a long time since I had had anything close to a romantic relationship in my life, even something as open-ended as with Aaron, and I wondered what it meant, whether something in my life had opened, or I had. A few weeks later, Aaron took me to a party. A friend of his, a potter, had moved to a new studio. At the long work table, there were all the tools for us to make something: clay, stands, newspaper, files, glazes, picks. But most people just stood around munching on olives and grapes from the cheese board and passing around cigarettes. They were connected to each other in amorphous ways: classmates, fraternities, friends of friends of friends. They were designers, social media managers, DJs, tech developers, but the sexy, young kind, who work with products like 3D art installations. A lot of the people from the first party were there. We were mostly Asian, so I felt at ease. It was a space in which I could choose to speak or not to speak, and it wouldn't mean anything more than it was. Kane arrived in a white t-shirt with strange illustrations of creatures I couldn't identify, worn under an expensive-looking dark jacket, and his hair, which had been as long as his chin when I last saw him, was tied back in a tiny rabbit's tail. I wasn't sure that I liked it. I was also unsure of whether to catch his eye, of whether he'd remember me. "Kane," Aaron said, as they exchanged greetings, patting each other on the shoulders. "Hey man, it's good to see you." I lingered behind a little awkwardly, a lost duckling. Aaron indicated me. "You remember from your party," he said. "Hi," I said. "Still doing good? Kane asked cheerfully. Pretty good, I told him. What are those drawings on your t-shirt? Oh, he said, they're like weird fruit. I looked at them more closely. They were drawings of hairy, anthropomorphic fruit, such as a pear with chicken legs and covered with bristles. It was a concept for an advertisement that didn't get picked. He crooked his mouth, but I still liked it. You drew this? A long time ago. Erin was chatting with the host, who had her hair bundled up to show her beautiful, long neck. The overhead lights were industrial in design and cast a yellow glow. Later, the conversation turned to China. The host had just returned from a pottery workshop there. We were all Asian, but only Kane and I were Chinese. The host and Kane spoke more and more forcefully. Erin and I stood silent. I was unsure of whether this was an argument, what emotions were at stake. People say there's all this bad shit happening there now, he said, like the government censorship, the control, the lack of privacy, the human rights violations, the fake baby formula, the people getting arrested, the host said. Right, he agreed, and I get it, but I don't like hearing it. Somehow the East is always the bad guy. It never gets to tell its own story. Like, let the people who actually live there speak for themselves. I nodded along. I didn't like to talk about being Chinese or Chinese American. I felt it was safer to keep my experiences to myself, unvoiced, and yet everything he said I agreed with. So he can be like this too, I thought. The argument ended with a laugh. The host disappeared to get a drink. I wandered to where Kane sat at the far end of the table. He started trimming the block of clay with a wire. I didn't know you knew how to do pottery. I stood close to the edge of the table. I don't, he said. I watched him wet his fingers from a bowl of water and shape the clay with his palms, deftly molding it into a ball. His hands were quickly covered in gray sludge. He plunged his hands into the clay and sank his fingers deep, with what looked like a very satisfying squelch. He looked up at me, and I felt the shock of his casual attention. Kids play with mud all the time, don't they? I'm just playing. Something took flight in me with a wrenching sweetness, like the feeling I got when I listened to a certain type of music when I was alone. It reverberated in a place that was hollow. I watched him dig his fingers into the clay, feeling completely dislocated from myself. And that is everything I'm going to read, and thank you very much.